Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of this community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking and Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your microphone and video or go to the LinkedIn Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone and say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Niall Kishtainy, a writer and economist and author of the forthcoming book, The Infinite City, Utopian Dreams on the Streets of London. Niall joins us from London, England. Welcome, Niall.
Thank you, Simeon.
Niall, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to become a writer?
Yeah, well, I guess I have always been interested in writing, but started taking it seriously really in my not until really my mid-30s, and it really came out of an academic context. So I was working on a PhD, I was teaching in university. Obviously that involves doing a fair amount of writing. It was academic economics, so it's a particular kind of writing, a particular kind of academic way of writing. And I guess at some point I started to get bored with that way of writing and wanted to write for a broader audience, and rather than publishing in academic journals, communicate with a broader set of people. So I started writing about my own subject for a more general audience. So that was where my first book, A Little History of Economics, came from. And then it sort of went on from there. I gradually got more interested in using storytelling and narrative to communicate ideas rather than the sort of academic way of writing. So that's really where it came from, a way of engaging with the ideas that I'm interested in and the world around me through storytelling, through non-fiction storytelling, basically.
Fantastic. And as you mentioned about a little history of economics, I think right away about everybody thinking economics is such a terrible thing. I think they have so many negative names for it, and that you were so successful in writing a book that really opens it up so anybody can understand exactly more than the definitions and the academic materials of economics, but why it's important in everyday life. And I think you do the same thing in the next book that we're about to, that you're just about to publish. Tell us about this. It's about utopias. Tell us about why you became interested and decided to write your next book about, again, another topic that people have a lot of trouble understanding.
Yeah, and a bit of a shift from the last book. I mean, I guess again, I suppose there was a bit of a personal thing going on for me. I was shifting away from sort of academic economics, and that can feel like quite a rigid kind of discipline sometimes. And then, a while ago, we had the financial crisis, and people started really questioning what economists were doing. And I guess from there, my writing then started to engage with kind of broader ways of thinking about economics and economic desire. And during these sort of tumultuous, I guess we've had quite a tumultuous decade and a couple of decades. And during these sorts of times, I make this point in the book that, utopian yearnings sort of tend to bubble to the surface more overtly. So it sort of came out of that sort of context. And then me moving towards wanting to use kind of storytelling and narrative in my writing, rather than sort of an abstract way of talking about things. And, over these few years, there's been an incredible growth in sort of narrative nonfiction. So nonfiction writing, writers using storytelling to talk about ideas. So it was really those various things coming together, and me kind of wanting to tell these kind of stories, and then using my own home city, London, as a kind of frame for it. So to give it some grounding and some kind of concreteness, rather than it just being a work of sort of political theory, which is not what I wanted to do, to ground it in stories and concrete things.
Fantastic. And as we'll see, this London gives us this very tangible thing to hold on to, this very,
Right.
I mean, and going through it, we'll hear tonight just about how special this city is, and clearly it's very dear to you, and it becomes dear to the reader. So let's jump into it. This is from chapter 2. The chapter is Thomas More, Tudor London and the Invention of Utopia. Here you write, quote, Thomas More's utopia is the quintessential communal society based on a community of goods and a city of disciplined citizens united in their high purposes of truth. When a household is in need of supplies, one of its members goes to one of the city's markets and takes what they need. No payment is made because there is plenty to go around, and no one would dream of taking more than they require. They are not driven to grab at goods by extreme want or by the desire to show off possessions. City spaces, too, are communal and not governed by money. Behind the houses are shared gardens full of vines and flowers, and the doors of the houses have no locks so that anyone can enter. They yield to the touch of the hand and close of themselves. Every 10 years, the houses are relocated by lot. At meal times, a trumpet call summons the utopians to their dining halls. Meals open with a reading on a moral theme, which the elders use to encourage discussion among youngsters. Youth and old are mixed at the tables so that elders can encourage good manners in the young and discourage useless chatter. In the evenings, there is music and spices are burnt and perfumes sprinkled around the hall. For the utopians believe that no kind of pleasure is forbidden, provided that no harm comes from it. After supper, the people converse in their gardens or make music. Sometimes they play games. One is a sort of mathematical combat in which different numbers battle it out. Another is a contest between the vices and the virtues, the vices attacking the virtues or cunningly undermining them, and the virtues defending themselves against attacks. The utopians have so little respect for gold that they use it to make their chamber pots, preferring to eat from simple earthenware dishes. What the utopians find especially perverse is that in so many societies, gold is valued more than those who impose value on it. So Niall, tell us all about Thomas More, Tudor London, and the Invention of Utopia.
Sure. So, I mean, this is where I start the story. So this is Thomas More in Tudor London, and he coined the word utopia, actually. So in his famous work, Utopia, he essentially made up this word, utopia, meaning good place or no place. It's a sort of pun in a way. So that's where I start the story. And what you just read out there, Simeon, is sort of his description of what it's like to live on the island of Utopia. And I guess what the story I'm telling is really him as a kind of Londoner. He was very much in London, very much involved in sort of the London economy, the legal. He was a lawyer. I mean, so what he's really famous for in history is becoming Lord Chancellor and then getting executed by Henry VIII for not agreeing with Henry's break from Rome and you know, all that politics. But before, what I'm focusing on this chapter is what he did before then, which was write Utopia, and how that came out of his London context. So someone who was seeing the London and the broader English economy change as capitalism was sort of burgeoning, and what that meant, and the problems the problems that arose from that. And he saw that in his job as a lawyer and as someone involved in the sort of commercial life of the city. In a sense, Utopia is a kind of echo of London in some way, although he's talking about a far off island, but in the issues that he's using that storytelling frame to explore, he's kind of using what was going on in London, some of the problems that were going on with the advent of capitalism and so on.
Niall, and tell us a little bit about this island itself. So
Yeah,
people
so
don't get there easily. It's an island, so it's inaccessible.
it's
In some
inaccessible,
ways,
but
kind of like the British Isles. Tell us about this and how it's
yeah, well,
constructed.
this is the classic sort of utopian. In the book, I guess this is the most classic one of the classic utopian traveler's tale, where some mariners are at sea and they get kind of lost and they get washed up to an island, and that story's been told, and they find this perfect society, this strange society. That kind of way of exploring utopia, of telling the story of utopia, it's an absolute sort of classic form of it, that in the literary utopia. So I think arguably Thomas More's one is the most famous one, and here you have the picture of the island of utopia. I think this is the Hans Holbein engraving on the first edition. So at the top there you see Amarot, which is the sort of main city, which is a kind of strange echo of London. So some of the physical features, the way that the river flows and so on, is quite similar to Tudor London, but it's obviously this kind of regenerated town that's moral and virtuous and so on. So there you see it in that engraving.
And
there.
tell us a little bit, Niall, now about his so More's life in London, because you say that he had this special connection to a place called the Charterhouse, which
Right.
was a monastery, and that these monasteries were kind of they were the way of the old life before Henry VIII and capitalism, and that he was really attracted to this place. Tell us about that and how that was a utopia in its own right.
Sure. So the way I framed it so far is, he was responding to things going on, the burgeoning of the capitalist economy. That's quite a modern secular way of looking at it. In a way, that's the more sort of left-wing way of looking, because there've been so many interpretations of what More was doing. That's the sort of more left-wing approach, which says, More was basically critiquing capitalism. But in some ways that's a bit anachronistic, because obviously this was a deeply religious society, and he was a deeply religious man, and so another kind of strand in utopia is religion and all the sort of religious ferment that was going on at the time. So he was a Catholic humanist looking to reform the church, not wanting a Protestant Reformation, but definitely anti-clerical and upset about the state of the church and the corruption of the church. But here we have Charterhouse, which is still, remnants of it still exist in London. You can go and visit it. This was a Carthusian monastery just beyond the city walls, and this was one sort of enclave in London where there was a really pious group of monks really living a Christian life. And to More, this was the kind of a remnant of a kind of uncorrupted Christianity, an uncorrupted Christian way of life on the edge of the city. So he became a kind of he attached himself to, he was kind of, well, this is in his biography, in his biographers differ about this. So but one idea is that he was wanting to become a monk basically, and so lived as a layman in the Charterhouse or near to the Charterhouse, and took part in their rituals, and was living this very kind of austere ascetic sort of life, as a kind of near monk, at the same time as he was pursuing the law and training to be a lawyer and becoming a well-known lawyer in the city. So he had these different strands to his life. And so he stayed at the Charterhouse for a few years, and then it seems like quite abruptly left and got married. But the relevance of that to utopia is that, another way of thinking about his island is that it's a kind of Charterhouse writ large, a virtuous community of saints, which he, part of the inspiration for it was the Charterhouse monks and some of their church services, and actually the temple of the utopians. There's a scene of them in their temple, and it's definitely got a kind of an echo of those, dimly lit church rituals in the Charterhouse church, in the monastery. So that's another strand of of his utopia.
Fantastic. And this idea of creating a better society, this ran throughout his life, right? Tell us about this. Is it called now Saint, here we have it, St. Lawrence Jewry. So here
Oh, St. Lawrence.
he is giving a reading about St. Augustine, telling the powers that be, lawyers, all these different kind of people, about how Augustine is viewing a great city.
Right, exactly. So this is another kind of, so what I try and do in the book is, have these kind of London locations that were important to the figure that I'm talking about. So this is another one, St. Lawrence Jewry, where this is a church in the heart of the city of London, right next to the Guildhall, which is the old seat of government, basically. And yes, he gave a sort of famous set of lectures about St. Augustine's city of God, where he's talking about, the heavenly city and the earthly city and so on. And there isn't a surviving text of these lectures, but what he was really doing, it seems, is starting to brew some of these ideas that would then turn into utopia a few years later. And he was a very young man when he gave these lectures, so he's very much sort of a prodigy in humanist Europe, with all this audience of very distinguished administrators and scholars and so on, and this young man who'd sort of tackled this huge work, the city of God, and giving these very a famous set of lectures, an impressive set of lectures about these ideas. So this is a kind of precursor to him then later on, when he had a bit of a break in his schedule, because he was a very busy man, and composing Utopia, when he was on this trip overseas and had a sudden break in his schedule, and it seemed that Utopia was just written quite quickly in a short space of time, when he suddenly was sort of off his duties for a few weeks.
Clearly something on his mind throughout his life.
Yes.
That putting God's earth, building God's kingdom on earth. So let's go on to the second chapter, the third chapter.
Sure.
Excuse me. This is Gerard Winstanley and Turning the World Upside Down in Civil War London. And I read from the third chapter, quote, "In the months following the execution of King Charles I, locals noticed odd happenings around Cobham and Walton. There were reports of a disorderly and tumultuous sort of people gathering at St. George's Hill. Claiming to be prophets, the people came to the hill and began to dig, and sowed the ground with parsnips and carrots and beans. They invited everyone to join them, promising to provide food and clothing. Within a few days, they had increased their number to several dozen, spending all day digging, and on one day firing the heath, which is a very great prejudice to the town. It is also claimed that they threatened to pull down posts and fences to enable them to cultivate the soil. The diggers, as the people came known, were led by Gerard Winstanley. St. George's Hill was part of the common land where local people grazed animals, dug turf and loam, and put up cottages. On one side, it overlooked a flat common that backed onto the royal hunting grounds at Oatlands Palace, which had originally been acquired by Henry VIII. Charles I gave the palace to his wife as a residence. The hill was also close to the far reaches of the Windsor Great Forest. The diggers prepared and planted about an acre of rough soil, cut wood to build houses and to sell in order to buy necessities, while they waited for their first harvest to ripen. An agricultural reformer of the time thought that the hill was an unpromising site for cultivation, when Stanley admitted that it was certainly a barren-looking piece of land, but claimed that the spot had been shown to him in dreams and visions. The diggers' efforts were divinely ordained, and their success on such poor land would be even stronger proof of the diggers' righteousness. And so, wrote Winstanley, I took my spade and went and broke the ground upon George Hill in Surrey, thereby declaring freedom to the creation, and that the earth must be set free from entanglements of lords and landlords, and that it shall become a common treasury to all, as it was first made and given to the sons of men. Niall, tell us about this incredible man, Gerard Winstanley, and the turning of the London Civil War, which I didn't even know.
Yeah. So I mean, it's he was a very different sort of character, to More. I mean, certainly definitely not part of the establishment in the way that More was. He was a merchant in the city, and sort of enmeshed with the Puritan scene there. And then at some point, so this is during the Civil War years, at some point, the war disrupted his trade, basically disrupted his business, and he's basically had to shut his business, and just seemed to have a sort of spiritual crisis as a result of this, and moved to an area close to London, Cobham, which is just sort of Surrey. I mean, now part of sort of more or less part of Greater London, but then would have been a very much a sort of rural area, and just moved there, and then gradually started this sort of, I mean, again, coming out of the context of this very sort of London being this very sectarian during the Civil War, all these extreme Puritan sects, often run by artisans and butchers and bakers and who knows what. And so he was coming out of that context, and so he started to gather his own sect out in Cobham, but it was rather different to the other ones that I've seen so far, in that it had this kind of socio-utopian kind of tinge to it, much more strongly than the others, and that they started doing this very practical, dramatic thing of going onto this hill and starting to dig and plant beans and carrots, and declaring that the land was now a common treasury, and that they were, a new righteous age was being born, and so on. So it's quite an extraordinary sort of upsurge of kind of Puritan, millenarian, utopian activity and preaching and yearning and so on.
And so now this is right next to the Windsor Castle, more or less. Is that what he's saying?
It's not, well, it's kind of not quite, well, the kind of, I think the ends of Windsor Forest would have come fairly reasonably close to it, so not so close to the actual palace, but these were vast royal forests. So where they were digging were kind of on the edge of some royal forest. So also Oatland Park, which is a royal forest. They weren't actually digging on those royal forests. These were this was a very barren bit of common land, not good land at all. Although their opponents kind of made out that they were trying to take over royal land and so on, but it was basically kind of a barren hill, really, and they started to set up this commune there.
And Niall, tell us about this idea of the common land. So this would be they were looked at as kind of crazy, that nobody would go there. This was just, it was just bare land. Nobody claimed it. It wasn't private property. It was kind of public property. But so these people were just seen as crazy. I mean, they weren't seen as breaking any laws. Is that right?
Well, no, I mean, it's common land, so that meant that the local people had sort of grazing rights and so on over it. So it wasn't sort of it wasn't private land, but there was no such thing as public land, really. It was more like customary rights over this common land as part of a feudal kind of economy. So yes, they were seen as crazy, but they were also seen as, oh yeah, so you're now looking around St. George's Hill today, right? The sort of area, but they were also seen as dangerous because they were kind of potentially infringing on people's rights to the land, and more powerful landowners worried that they might be trying to turn over the kind of the order and the hierarchy and so on, because this is all coming out of the Civil War context of executing the king and wanting to overturn hierarchy and the existing economic and political structure. So it's potentially a very sort of threatening thing. So they were, considered crazy, but also threatening and dangerous. And that's, eventually what happens. They get forced off the land in quite a violent way by local landowners. So there you've got St. George's Hill. Oh, there you go. So that's them. They are at some point taken, the authorities are so worried about them that they actually do take them to Whitehall for an audience with Sir Thomas Fairfax, who's the sort of parliamentary general. And you've got this is a news sheet, basically kind of printing what was said. It's quite interesting. So you see them there in that image with their hats on, and that was quite significant because that was a way of being rebellious, basically not refusing to take your hat off in front of a superior. That's quite an important sort of detail in that drawing. And there was a long explanation that they gave about why they weren't going to take their hats off, because they're just, we're equal to you, why should we, sort of thing. So this really publicized what they were doing, this piece of literature.
And tell us about this. It says, of the levelers of England. So levelers, they were people who were trying to destroy the classes. They were looking for equality, or what does that mean exactly?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, levelers used in different ways. I mean, there was it can mean just to leveling, someone who's trying to bring about equality. And in this context, that means, some sort of class realignment and so on. I mean, there was another group called the Levellers, another London group that was working for sort of democratic change in political rights. The Diggers were sometimes called the True Levellers, potentially meaning that they were asking for something more radical, which was to do with the distribution of land and access to economic resources in a way that other more political levelers who are looking for political reform might not ask for in the same way.
Niall, tell us about what is your personal feeling about this man, Gerard Winstanley. I mean, when I think about him, when I was reading about him, he seemed like, he's already kind of an aristocrat who has this kind of midlife crisis, I think you say even in the book, and then he is always respected, even where in that picture where he has his hat on, apparently his superior respected him very much. I mean, and even granted him and said, okay, go dig, whatever. But he seemed to be somebody, just like Thomas More, who really garnered respect from all people. And then even at the end of his life, he kind of just abandoned what he was doing and went back to a normal life. But he seems like an extremely noble kind of person. I mean, very high-minded.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, he wasn't really an aristocrat. He was a commercial person. So he made money in the city. So and he certainly wasn't, part of a sort of, Thomas More was very much part of an elite power structure, which he wasn't. He was much more of a merchant, basically. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary what he did. He's at the same time he's also quite enigmatic. I mean, in later in the chapter, I say that basically the Civil War, kind of the very radical element of the struggle that went on within the Civil War years around these sects kind of was eventually lost. And he essentially went back to the middle of London and became a merchant again, and kind of was living a life very much a sort of orthodox kind of life again. And he wrote nothing else. Nothing really is known about him. It's just a few kind of glimpses of him later on. So it's an intriguing sort of thing, like what exactly happened to him. He retreated from the hill, and then what? He went and began living this very sort of conventional life again. But he has very much resonated down. Particularly, there was a sort of revival of study of this period in the 60s and 70s, and now he's very much someone who inspires a lot of radicals today. I mean, you've even got the Diggers of San Francisco in the 60s who basically take their inspiration from him, and movements today that sort of talk about the land and inequality and so on, and he's still very much a standard bearer for that. So his ideas do echo down to us, I think.
You also get this impression, I mean, from what you tell about him and the Diggers, that they were some of the nonviolent pioneers. I mean, they just let these people beat them up and they prayed for them and
Yeah.
be attacked. And they really seem, I mean, we talk about Gandhi and Thoreau and Martin Luther King Jr., but you have this Gerard Winstanley there and 200,
I know
300
it's
years before.
yeah. So it's it's an early kind of, what today's protesters would call direct action or civil disobedience. And yeah, I mean, he basically said, what was his famous phrase? He said, words have to be sort of burnt up. Words have no meaning. You have to act, basically. And you get that, feel that resonance in sort of modern utopian movements, even groups like Extinction Rebellion, who often have these posters say, act now, sort of thing. So yeah, direct action and civil disobedience is an early exemplar of that extraordinary man.
Fantastic. Wow. Let's move on to chapter 4. I know this is one of your favorite chapters. This is about Thomas Spence, Robert Wedderburn, and Georgian dreams of a bright reforming age. You write, Niall, quote, "A coin spins through the air, glints for a moment, then falls into shadow before landing on the dirt in the middle of a narrow alley in the district of Holborn, just to the west of the boundary of London's old city walls. This lane, little turnstile, is one of several byways that lead off the busy trading artery of High Holborn at their north entrances. It was once nothing more than a cut-through with a turnstile to prevent cattle from straying on to the main road from the fields lying to the south. By the time of the coin's flight, the last decade of the 18th century, the alley is full of shops, grocers, shoemakers, and sellers of second-hand clothes. A passerby at the time making for the road or seeking out an onion or a hat might be briefly detained by the gleaming motion that catches his eye as he hurries along the dogleg alley. He might stop, pick up the coin, and turn it over in the palm of his hand, have a moment of bafflement, then of recognition. The man might well come from the bottom of London's dangerously strained social hierarchy, scraping by as a porter or a street hawker, perhaps occasionally as a pickpocket. And as he examines the coin more closely, he feels a little thrill of triumph. In his palm lies an ordinary farthing, an emblem of British power and wealth, but it has been tampered with, vandalized, in fact. Into the metal across the head of the king has been stamped the words, "You rogues," and on the reverse, over Britannia, with her shield and trident held aloft, "You fools." Our finder glances around and delightedly secretes the coin into his coat before continuing with his errand. More doctored coins land in the alley, proclaiming, "No starvation, fat bairns, war or land, you rogues, peace forever, liberty forever." They come from a shop in which lurks the money vandal, a short man in shabby clothes, rather feeble looking because of a stroke of palsy from which he has never quite recovered. A profile struck onto one of his coins shows him rather sour-faced, with a heavy, frowning brow and pursed lips, a study of high-minded obduracy. Some of his acquaintances do indeed think of him as an inflexible, cantankerous man. This is Thomas Spence, bookseller, coin dealer, lexicographer, and Georgian London's fiery utopian of the streets. His small establishment, the Hive of Liberty, is one of London's backstreet bookshops, offering mystical chapbooks, astrological almanacs, and unorthodox religious and philosophical tracts. Inside Spence's shop, strange-sounding verses are written along the walls, some of them declarations to the effect that no amount of threats will curtail his important work. All around, thousands of coins are piled up in heaps. Spence occasionally spins a coin into the alleyway, then turns to arrange the revolutionary political pamphlets that he has on sale. Another time, he might be found talking with a customer in his broad Newcastle burr and about his London forebear, Thomas More, and the bracing ideals of his famous contemporary, Thomas Paine, and why his own are better. Tell us, Niall, about Thomas Spence.
Yeah. So I mean, you've got, he is you've got there the context of, his London context, this book, so this eccentric sort of bookseller, with his coins and his pamphlets. And gradually he gathered a kind of group of followers around him who became known as the Spenceans, and had a particular kind of utopian vision, which links back to what we were talking about with Winstanley. It was to do with land and to do with challenging the power of landlords. And he had much more of a sort of, in a sense, the beginnings of a sort of program. So the idea of having kind of communally owned land under a kind of local authority, that there would be some sort of revolution or some sort of taking over of the land, and that it would be managed locally by the people. Oh, here we go. So this is Little Turnstile today, which I have walked back and forth many times. So this is High Holborn. And that's still the same little alley where he had his shop. So this is and this is leading, I don't know how well you all know London, but this leads into Lincoln's Inn Fields, where you have the London School of Economics, and a lot of legal offices and so on. But this is the alley, so it's still there, Little Turnstile. Now you've got sort of a couple of bars and a newsagent, and I think there's a massage place and a pub and so on. But that's where he had his hive of liberty. So this was where he was spinning his coins out into the street with these kind of utopian slogans on them. He had a kind of pressed a sort of, I don't know what you call it, a metal stamp or something that you could sort of imprint letters onto the coin. So these sort of doctored coins. I found that a fascinating sort of image. It was the first thing I wrote, actually, because I found it quite an inspiring. So here we have, actually, I think you have some pictures of the coins, don't you? I can't hear you, actually.
I've got them right here. Let me show them right
Because
now.
that's pretty nice. Oh, here we go. So these are his actual coins. So you've got there, you rogues, you can see that on the top left there. You fools, full bellies, you rogues, and all this. So these are his actual coins. It's quite amazing, I think. And these are some of his letter stamps.
And that says Niall after the revolution.
After the revolution. So there you've got. Yeah, so you've got you rogues, the kind of the feeling of, utopian estrangement, like society is terrible. But then you've got the kind of utopian vision there after the revolution, group of people dancing under trees and so on. So yeah, he has a particularly original way of expressing his so here we have the other thing that he did. So he was very much from a kind of working class sort of background, definitely not part of the kind of cultural elite. And one of his ideas was that the English language itself kind of holds people back. It's a form of oppression because it's unphonetic. It's very difficult to learn to read English and to pronounce words because it's unphonetic. So his idea was that stopped working class people from acquiring knowledge, and he devised a sort of phonetic alphabet. So these are some of his works. He wrote this book, a history of Crusonia, which is sort of one of his utopian tracts, which sort of is a kind of sequel to Robinson Crusoe, setting out this kind of utopian vision, but it's written in this, if you see that, in the Crusonian manner. So the idea was that these Crusonians on their island invented this new type of, English alphabet, this phonetic English alphabet, so that was one of his projects, was to then start publishing.
Niall, so this says a supplement to thy.
Yes. A supplement to the history of Robinson Crusoe, being the history of Crusonia, told in the Crusonian manner. And then you've got there a quote from Milton. So yeah, all in this strange sort of alphabet. I think his idea was to sort of publish material, literature, political literature, whatever. And
then he writes here even price with an I, because that makes sense. He even writes here on the bottom price with an I, because I is how you should say the letter.
Exactly. And I think there you've got the actual alphabet. But so the idea here was that political inequality and power is sort of embedded in the language itself, and that you need to reform it. He was an extraordinary, an amazing character. Oh, so this was his. He also published. So he was part of. So in London, there were these kind of nascent or working class organisations at the time. One was called the London Corresponding Society, and it was basically a way for working class people to get together to talk about politics and to get access to literature, of course, because it was hard for people, if you didn't have much money, to actually get hold of books and to get hold of literature. So it was a way of helping them to read philosophical text or political text, or Thomas Paine and so on. So this was one of Spence's journals. So the idea was that in this journal, Pig's Meat, there would be a selection of texts that would be made available to people to read.
And Niall, tell us a little bit. So this title of the periodical, Pig's Meat and Lessons for the Swinish Multitude, would that be they are taking on kind of a pejorative title that has been they were all called the poor swinish multitude. Tell us if that's correct, and if the parallel today would be Hillary in the United States, Hillary Clinton calling supporters of Donald Trump a basket of deplorables, and then taking on the title deplorable. So they would probably publish something called the Deplorable Weekly or something.
Well, what this comes from is the Pig's Meat, the lesson from the swinish multitude. So this is all happening in the shadow of the French Revolution. So this is the 1790s, and what this title refers to is Edmund Burke, who was a conservative, who wrote this very famous history of the French Revolution, disparaging revolutionary politics, and saying that basically society and social wisdom and all the sort of institutions that we've built up over centuries that keep society stable would be trampled under by a swinish multitude, and that's the phrase that Edmund Burke uses. So that and of course he's opposed to someone like Thomas Spence was a revolutionary. So this is a kind of ironic title. He's kind of making fun of Edmund Burke and saying, look, we are the swinish multitude. These are the lessons that I'm wanting to distribute to this multitude.
Fantastic. And we see at the bottom, they're printed for Thomas Spence at the Hive of Liberty, number 5 or something, Little Turnstile, High Holborn. So that's where he was, that little alleyway which we saw where he was flicking his coins, his vandalized coins into.
That's right.
Other people to pick up.
Oh yeah, so that must be this is okay, there we go. Yeah, so that's from his journal, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. And here again, his last coin, the other coins you wanted to show. This is the one I read about.
So that's him, actually. That is a profile of Thomas Spence there on the right. And then you've got I among slaves. What does it say? Enjoy my freedom or something. Yeah, and I think that with the cat there, that was thrown into his coffin at his funeral.
Wow. Fantastic. Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter we have here. This is our last chapter for the night, chapter 8, Reclaim the Streets and Utopian Ecstasy at the Turn of the Millennium. So we're jumping forward a few years.
We're jumping a few chapters just to get to today, kind of thing. Yeah.
So here I read from your book, from chapter 8, and I quote, "A Saturday morning in May 1995, and on Camden High Street in North London, people are doing normal things, weekend things, browsing stalls, popping into cafes, and with some trepidation, making their way across the car-clogged road. Suddenly, a crashing sound startles the pedestrians. 2 cars have collided, bringing the traffic to a halt. The drivers get out of their vehicles and start shouting at each other. One of them produces a hammer and begins smashing up the other driver's car. The pressure cooker of the city boiling over, it seems, into the uncontrolled rage of a motorist forced out of his isolated metal box to face a fellow human with fists and weapons. As the people gape at the scene, hundreds of others emerge from the crowd and from out of the nearby tube station. Some jump on top of the two cars and begin smashing them up. Shards of glass go flying as a man kicks out a window screen. Others throw paint around in daub yellow swirls onto the carcasses of the vehicles. A banner goes up over the road. Reclaim the streets, free the city, kill the car. Revelers fill the street. Drummers and jugglers appear. People power up the bicycle-mounted rinky-dink sound system by pedaling on it. Children swing on a climbing frame that has been placed in the middle of the road, and free food is given out. The normal everyday has been overturned. The road made into an arena for experimentation, play, and social connection, rather than simply a way of getting from here to there. A poster for this strange happening is organized by a group of activists going by the name Reclaim the Streets, says, if you want to change the city, you have to control the streets. So Niall, tell us about these happenings that we're going to see that are very recent, that many people would consider them, the people who do them, misfits or punks, or they're just trying to make something happen. You have a completely different take. You say these are utopians and they are following in the footsteps of the French situationists who did not like the idea of having life being, okay, you work to earn money and then you use the money to spend on TVs when you're not working, and that's your leisure. And they're saying, no, my life should not be dictated by work or leisure and by capital. It should, and in order to do that, we have to break this kind of these scenarios that we're pushed into. Tell us all about Reclaim the Streets.
So I mean, this is a sort of set of kind of uprisings, if you like, that happened in London in the 90s. And I guess these are quite different to the sort of earlier utopias that we've talked about today. These are very much sort of what you might call countercultural utopias, so coming from the 1960s and particularly 1968 in France. So not exactly here we go. So we've got, so not setting out a kind of blueprint. So often people think of utopia as a kind of blueprint, so you've got that kind of perfect society. So what you read out with Thomas More saying, the islanders eat dinner at a certain time and read out a text and all this. So the idea of a sort of blueprint that kind of crystallizes what it will look like. These are very different kinds of utopias. They're much more kind of performative, I would say, utopias that are much more open-ended, that are not kind of proffering a closed blueprint, but are doing something much more that feels like kind of in the moment experimentation with a kind of utopian set of yearnings or set of kind of consciousness, where you create a sort of prefigurative space in a city. So, for example, Reclaim the Streets, taking over a street and using the street for something else. So, what these guys were saying was that, the streets are normally a kind of viaduct for capitalism, the cars going from A to B, people trying to get to work, trying to circulate commodities around the city. Now we're going to use it for something else. We're going to use it for connection, for community building, whatever, in a temporary kind of autonomous zone in the city that will probably vanish in a couple of days or even in a couple of hours. So it's a different sort of notion of utopia. But you had this series of things happening in London over this time. So you've got some nice pictures there of Camden, I think, haven't you, of what it was looked like. So these were very kind of, there they are on there. There they are smashing up the car there. So you could call them kind of protestivals. They're kind of a mix of a protest, but a festival where people are invited to sort of come in and participate. And this is very much a template for, a lot of the political movements that are happening still today around the world, in the States and in the UK with the environmental movement and so on. So these were very much a sort of template for that. Okay, so here, go on.
Tell us a little bit about this. Then these Londoners, just years after, during those same kind of protestivals, they did not want this M11 connecting highway built. And
Yes.
they defended this tree, this lonely tree that was going to be taken down so that they could
Yes.
build this road, and they lived in it. And then
Right.
it was this commune, not that different from Gerard Winstanley's
Yeah.
Diggers.
Your way. Yeah. So what I was just talking about there, the reclaim the streets, the Camden stuff, this grew out of an earlier set of that movement grew out of an earlier set of protests, which actually is the main thing that I talk about in that chapter, which is this protest against a road that was going to be built in East London, a road that was going to link from kind of close to the river up to a motorway that leads out of London, and it was going to smash through a lot of districts and destroy quite a lot of ancient woodland and houses and so on, and it was a catalyst for this sort of uprising of kind of energy in this area of Wanstead, which is a kind of suburb of East London, and all these kind of little kind of like utopian microstates kind of built up, kind of grew up around the route of this road. The most famous one was at Claremont Road, which was a kind of 19th century terraced houses close to the tube line, and a whole kind of, there we go, there's some amazing pictures of it there. These houses had been condemned a long time ago because to make way for this new road, and they created this whole kind of little commune in there that was sort of dedicated to living in a different way, and created a sort of art house where people created artworks, lived in this sort of communal way, and created some extraordinary sort of homemade architecture. So there's I don't know if you've got the picture of the tower there, that picture. Yeah. They created this amazing sort of tower on the roof of one of the houses, and that was the sort of where their last stand kind of was, where their last stand against the police took place. So there was eventually this very dramatic sort of eviction between these squatters and the police. It's an amazing sort of an amazing episode, and there were other little enclaves all along the area. So they were protesting against a road, but at the same time they were kind of again trying out new ways of life, kind of non-capitalist ways of life. So again, this idea of the sort of prefigurative utopia, that you don't necessarily need a blueprint which you kind of have a revolution to impose on people, but you can just sort of experiment in the moment in a much more
And here we have it.
This is it today. So that's Claremont Road. That's all that's left of it. So over that wall is the big M11 road now that thunders past. There it is. So that was full of jugglers and artworks and all sorts of crazy stuff going on for a few months, and it became a very famous bit of sort of London's protest history.
So Niall, so what they did, all of these protesters, as we mentioned, they were doing something that is really, they were trying to break this way of living that was forced upon them, and they were breaking this normal everyday situation that, okay, life is like that. So they're creating their own utopias. So let's move into the last chapter here, where you talk about how that is important. So and that things have changed. It's not that, or that the idea of a utopia being, something that, it's a new polity that they go and they found a city or something. That doesn't have to be like that. It can just be something. It can be a thought process. It can be a discussion. It does. And here you write, in many utopias, then there's a tension between outcome and process. By refraining from pinning down ultimate aims beyond the exploration of a present utopian moment, London's countercultural utopias showed a potentially infinite process of experiment and subjective expression, exposing the narrowness of critiques that claim that utopianism leads to tyranny because of its alleged inflexibility. But the notion of utopia as a form of prefigurative politics, creating in the here and now, a mirror of a future transformed society, has been criticized for lacking the means for converting momentary utopian euphoria into longer-term social transformation. Without the rudder of a larger set of social aims, an outpouring of carnivalesque energy can easily lose its way and turn into a solipsistic form of enjoyment for a group of countercultural adepts that fails to draw in a broader set of people. And amid the exhilaration of believing that one has created a rupture in social reality and entered a state of utopian grace, one might overlook the structures of hierarchy and privilege that can be reproduced in crucibles of utopian experiment. In Occupy London's tent city, for example, some participants reported that it was often women who ended up doing tasks such as washing the dishes that allowed the camp to survive the winter in the open. Niall, tell us, what do you wish utopians of the future, what do you wish all citizens, for that matter, wherever they live, what do you wish them?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do, I think in that, what you've just read out there is a really nice little summary there, you know, this tension between utopia as experiment and utopia as something concrete that you want to impose. And actually what I'm saying is, you know, we need to sort of reclaim the word, because it's become an insult to say, so, you know, when you say someone's utopian, that's actually an insult now. And that's often based on a very erroneous image of what utopia is, which is just this, you know, a blueprint that you just impose on people. And it's actually there's much more to it than that, and it's a much more flexible sort of framework. But that it's basically what it is, you know, harnessing the imagination to think about how we want our societies to be in a way that speaks to both the head and the heart. And through these stories, through concrete expressions of political and economic desires, you speak to people's deeper sort of emotions, much more so than, you know, in a sort of political tract or just an ordinary sort of manifesto. So I think it's absolutely essential in any healthy society to have that avenue, to have that outlet for people to think about how they want things to be. If we think about the kinds of things facing us now, whether it's climate change or economic inequality, we need that sense of openness, that sense of imagination, to be able to get anywhere with it. Otherwise, everything gets shut down in sort of, well, that's not how we do it, or that isn't how we've done it in the past. So it's absolutely essential to sort of healthy political culture.
Fantastic. And I wanted to break in to say that I get the impression that, I mean, you talk about how people who are utopian today or have utopian thoughts or who are expressing utopian thoughts, they are accused of hypocrisy because, you know, they're not perfectly expressing those utopian ideals. And I believe you would agree with me when my mom asked her mother, "Why do you go to church? They're all hypocrites." Her mother said, "They go to church. That's exactly why they go to church, because they're hypocrites."
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're asking for if you're imagining a completely different kind of society or radically changed society, of course, you can't embody everything about that future society because you exist in a previous society. So in some sense, you're bound to be a bit hypocritical about it. Well, if you look at the climate, that would be an obvious one, you know.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's see how we can buy the book. Here it is.
Yes. Well, it's
Amazon.
not. So it's out next. It's not out for a little while, so this was a kind of sneak preview. But yeah, it's out next July, if all goes to plan.
So there it is on Amazon. I'll share this with our Zoom meeting right here. There it is on Amazon, so you can pre-order it right now. And let's see how we can stay in touch with Niall.
Sure.
It's easy enough, niallkishtainy.com. So people can reach out to you, Niall, and ask you about all of these characters. Where they can buy the book also if they need anything. So there it is, all right there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I will put that also in the chat room. Here is Niall's website. So thank you very much to Niall Kishtainy.
Thank you, Simon. It's delightful to talk to you.
So let's take a look at what's coming up next week. We have the Psychological Safety Playbook, Lead More Powerfully by Being More Human. In the late 1990s, a sticker provided by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, acronym OSHA, could be read on the backs of cars in the United States. The sticker confronted its reader with propositional logic. If you don't know what OSHA means, you're in trouble. Today, you may hear less about physical workplace safety and see fewer OSHA stickers, and more about safety of another kind, psychological safety. According to the management consulting behemoth McKinsey, psychological safety is a workplace climate in which, quote, employees feel comfortable asking for help, sharing suggestions informally, or challenging the status quo without fear of negative social consequences, end quote. Are you still thinking about that OSHA sticker and getting in trouble because you've never heard of psychological safety? Lucky for us, Dr. Caroline Helbig and Minette Norman just co-authored a practical step-by-step playbook to help you implement psychological safety in your workplace and are coming on our show to do a live workshop with us. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simeonmorrow.com. Once again, that's a psychological safety playbook. Lead more powerfully by being more human. Once again, thank you so very much to Niall Kishtainy. Thank you to Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From London, England, and New London, New England, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.